All right. We are live. What's up, y'all? My name is Amir. I'm here with Nathan today. We're going to be having an awesome conversation. We are talking about politics, why some political parties lose, why some political parties win. And Nathan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, so Nathan Fatal, would you like to just let everybody know who you are and a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the main hat that I wear is that I'm the director of community organizing for the Leadership Institute. We train people on leadership, activism, and running for office, among other things, but those are the primary ones. And I met you, Amir, I think it was through Young Americans for Liberty, and how I was overseeing stuff in California, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a long time now, in a good way. I'm glad it's been that long, and it'll continue, and we're gonna keep doing cool stuff together. And where the overlap is in terms of our two networks and the stuff we've worked on is that I think we both believe in people have more power than they realize, and people are capable of more than they realize. And freedom is not something that we should wait for permission to have or to use. There's a lot of freedom just comes with what actions you are willing to take. It's not something that's given to you by a piece of paper or by a government. Hopefully they'll protect it. But anyway, as far as what I do at the Leadership Institute and what I do in politics, it's either training people to do the aforementioned things like running for office and effective activism, or it's doing those things with them. I personally am not running for office, and I don't plan to, but helping good people who are running for office, that's something I do on my own time, or actively engaging in the activism or the community organizing. And it's been a really awesome, profound journey, and I know it's going to continue to be. So I've learned a lot, and I like to impart what I've learned to others.
Awesome. Yeah, we met. I like about 10 years ago now, and you were one of the dudes outside of California who was coming into California, and one of the few actually who saw the value back then in California. And to this day, it seems like you do believe in that value in California, in the influence that California has and can have on not just the United States, but the entire rest of the world. I argue that places like Los Angeles are the trend-setting, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, the Bay Area. These places are the trend-setting hubs of the world currently.
Absolutely. I would go further. I agree that they're trendsetters, but I would go even further and say that LA is the cultural capital of America. For better or worse, whether we like it or not, it's the place that, yes, starts the trends, set the trends, but that sets a cultural tone. And obviously Hollywood plays a huge role in that. But it's not just Hollywood. It's also Rodeo Drive. It's also Santa Monica. It's also it's a lot of parts of LA that set the tone for what is it cool to wear, to say, to believe, to associate with, and people look to California to decide what's cool, what's in, what's relevant, and a lot of times some pretty bad ideas come out of here. So,
and pretty good ideas as well.
Absolutely.
That's the thing about California. It's this duality where some of the best ideas and some of the worst ideas are exported from here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not all, but a lot of the things that seem or feel or are mainstream in America right now, whether they're good or bad, and there are different perspectives on that, LA has played a huge role in establishing those and what they are right now. And San Francisco plays a role too. I kind of have this theory that LA sets a tone San Francisco sets it more in stone, and they say, we're going to take whatever LA does and make it more intense. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Then it gets to New York, and New York markets and sells it. And then it gets to Washington, and they legislate it and ram it down our throats. And then it gets to Chicago, and they just point a gun at you, and they're like, you'd better just do it, whatever we say. But yeah,
all right. So as you know, somebody who was born and raised in the Bay, and then spent most of my adult life in Los Angeles, I have to slightly disagree with you about who starts certain cultural things. For example, cannabis culture is much more of was much more of a Northern California, Bay Area thing. And that culture grew from there, imported down. Specific music, for example, the Bay Area hip hop influence transitioned into Los Angeles. A lot of the LA rappers interchanged on culture. But yeah, to your point, LA still has the dominance, and you do bring up a really good point there, because in my mind, I usually think LA is the primary mover. As I was saying this, I said Silicon Valley as well, because they're the people who are controlling every social media platform that we're on right now. You know,
it's the control center for the Matrix.
Yeah, it's the control center. But yeah, to your point, a lot of those ideas that they're controlling here now were popularized here. You know, another thing I just realized, example about the Bay in LA is the LGBT community. Like Castro in San Francisco was a historic area for that type of community. And then that seemed to be one of the epicenters of that cultural rise. But yeah, LA is still, you know, I'd say because LA is where media is influential, that's why it is a better place to be if you're trying to get your ideas to gain influence globally, right?
Absolutely. And I like that you use the term epicenter, because I was also going to use that term that, you know, I think LA is also a cultural or the cultural epicenter of America. It doesn't mean that there are no influential ideas that come from anywhere else. It doesn't mean that nowhere else sets the tones. It just means that this is where the most of it comes from. But there are tremors elsewhere, right? But as far as politics, you know, if you can find a model, a message, an approach that works in LA, especially one that goes against the grain in LA and still works, then I think that you can probably adapt, apply that to anywhere else in the country, at least to other big cities. LA is a great testing ground, petri dish, experiment, whatever you want to call it. And we've very much been experimented on over the last couple of years, as you know. But yeah, it's a great place to experiment and try new things.
Yeah, and to your point too, you know, the difference between the Bay and LA that I do see is that LA, it's Los Angeles, that's a city, right? Walnut Creek to San Francisco to Oakland to San Jose to Vallejo, you know, these are all very distinct areas. LA is, you know, there are these distinct areas like you brought up. You know, it's not just Hollywood, it's Santa Monica, it's these other areas, and then it comes together to build this global influence. And to your point, you know, it's not just entertainment. If you look at the fitness trends that are the most popular on planet Earth today, I mean, I'm a calisthenics athlete. Calisthenics really grew through Los Angeles on social media and became popularized arguably in that area. So transitioning that into politics, my thought process with being in the Republican Party in Los Angeles County was, this is the biggest Republican Party in the country. This is arguably the most important Republican Party to be in, because by the numbers, it's the biggest Republican Party in the country. Right. And the influence that can be garnered through an apparatus of that size comparatively to, say, political party apparatuses in smaller areas, it's like night and day, you know?
Yeah, I think there's something like, I haven't checked the voter data recently, but I think there's something like 1 million registered Republicans in LA County. Keep in mind that LA County is a population of about 10 million people. City of LA is about 4 million people. So 1 million is a large number, but it's still, and it's a larger number than you have in any other county in the country, but it's still a minority in LA city and county in California.
A huge minority, which is wild. You say 1 million people, and that's bigger than the population of Wyoming. So there are more Republicans in Los Angeles County than Wyoming. So, yeah. But there's so many more Democrats that it's you know, if you're a Republican running for office in Los Angeles County, in most of the areas, you're probably not going to win. There are some Republican pockets in Los Angeles County, but those could arguably be flipped. They're not like very strong. Most of them are not very strong.
And nothing here is guaranteed or promised for anybody who is Republican, conservative, libertarian, or even independent. You really have to fight for whatever you have and to keep it. And Democrats have absolute dominance, absolute domination in LA city and county and the state of California. So, and yeah, there are pockets that don't go that way. Yeah. A hyper majority, you could say. But yes, officially, I think the term is a super majority. Yeah.
Yes. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, how can you maneuver through a supermajority? And what I would say is it's actually possible. We can look at Democrats and how they maneuver in places like Texas. In the Texas legislature, they have a majority Republicans elected, but Democrats still find a way to have their voices be heard. So, you know, as far as the two parties go, it seems to me that the Democratic Party, as far as just pure political strategy goes, does a much better job than Republicans do. Not saying it's a right or wrong strategy. It's just from a pure political lens, you all come together better. And as a result, you can garner success more efficiently than, say, what we're seeing with the House Speaker debate right now, where all the Democrats on every vote, they're lockstep, no deviation. But the Republicans, there's always this civil war that's going on, and the cohesion is very hard to unite, even though there are plenty of people in the Republican Party, like myself, like yourself, who do try to bring that cohesion together. And it's just, you know, there's just a lot of resistance to it. That was my biggest problem in the Republican Party, was you're in this apparatus and you're supposed to be coming together for common goals. And instead,
that's what a party is supposed to be for.
Exactly. And there's constant infighting in the party, like you're not in the party.
Right.
Like you're some outsider. You
and
know?
So much more energy goes to the infighting than the outfighting.
Yes.
It goes more to the infighting than the organizing. It goes more to, you know, what's the term for frivolous? Often frivolous little debates, not over things that don't matter necessarily, but that are just kind of irrelevant. And very little time and energy goes into, well, what do we actually need to do to win on behalf of these principles? So, what you pointed to about Democrats being generally better organized, you're right. It's not a matter of right versus wrong morally. Anyone can be, you can be well organized for good ideas or bad ideas, right? But when it comes to politics and actually winning, I don't want to discount right versus wrong, but winning is a matter of effectiveness versus ineffectiveness in this case. It's not about who's the most principled. And if it was, then then it would be debatable even if Republicans would win, because Republicans are not necessarily the most principled in California. But if it was a battle of principle, then we would. If it was about who's the most principled winning, we would see a very different government.
Ron Paul would have been president if that was the America that we lived in, right?
Ideally.
But instead, the Republican Party, instead of figuring out how to most efficiently win a presidential election, they decided to completely split the party to make sure one dude doesn't grow and doesn't get a nomination. And to this day, we're seeing that fight happen. And the Democrats are just from the outside in looking in, going like, yeah, y'all keep fighting. Y'all keep fighting each other. Yeah, that's perfect. We're going to go organize with each other. At the end of the day, again, this is not, when we talk about these political strategies, it's not about what's moral or right or wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, at the end of the day, falls in line.
I was just thinking about him. Because Democrats, even when they silence opposing voices within their own ranks, even when they did to Bernie Sanders what Republicans did to Ron Paul and Rand Paul, they will still get back into lockstep after the division. But among Republicans, the division will be the status quo. It will always be divided, and they never heal it over. Oh yeah, for decades. I mean, what you just brought up right now has been over a decade now.
I've been in the Republican Party. I registered a Republican in 2007, and this has been a battle that's been happening to essentially win the heart of the Republican Party. And the position that I'm promoting, and I believe you're promoting, is more of one of the old American right that's not into war and into more traditional values and small government, real small government. And
yeah, I mean, for me, it's the traditional values part doesn't play a huge role in it. It is a factor, of course, but for me, it's about limited, transparent, accountable, accessible government. Accessible meaning you can interact with it. Transparent meaning you know what they're up to. Accountable meaning they act like they're supposed to act, which is that they work for you. And then as far as policy, I mean, yeah, non-interventionism. And what's happening right now in the world is not that. And we're experiencing the consequence. We're always experiencing the consequences of American interventionism. But the original conservatives, well, it wasn't just conservative like this list, like a platform. It was also, let's think about this with a conservative mindset, a conservative attitude. What are the consequences of intervening in the affairs of another country? And George Washington was hundreds of years ahead of his time. He knew this would happen. He wasn't saying this is never going to happen just because I'm saying that it shouldn't happen. It was more of a warning, like, hey, when this does happen, I told you so. And it's happening.
And George Washington is a great example of an American who tried so hard to keep opposing sides together to find common ground. And Washington was a Federalist, but he was constantly trying to find common ground between the Federalists and anti-Federalists before they even had a name. Right. They didn't just start out with those names. Those names were the start of the political party system that we see today. Back then, there were no political parties in America. And George Washington, in the historical record, shows that he was trying to bring these opposing sides together. But these opposing sides, what we're saying is like the more Jeffersonian side and then the more Hamiltonian side were just, clashing before the Constitution was even the Constitution.
There's always been division in America.
Always division. And, the thing is that there have been these leaders in American history that have been trying to keep it together from the inception of America. So the ideas that we're talking about, essentially it comes down to freedom, and this faction of the Republican Party, whatever we call it, the freedom, it's a tale as old as the Republican Party, actually. And even during the founding of the Republican Party, there were these factions, and Abraham Lincoln was actually, for example, more towards the communist faction of the Republican Party. And we see today neoconservatives, these were historically disenfranchised Democrats who didn't have a home in the Democratic Party like they used to. And then many of them flipped over to the Republican Party. So I think it's important to just like distinguish what these ideas that we're talking about are, and that they do surpass the political party system. It's just the reason we're saying Republican right now is because it seems that that's the biggest party in America that those ideas can be promoted in currently. Would you say?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's this sentiment that that the Republican Party is one of, for people who believe in limited government and constitutional limits on government, things like that. They might see that the Republican Party is a very flawed, perhaps inherently flawed, but still useful vehicle, right? And the alternatives are kind of presented as like, here's this gold standard alternative, and it's like, it's a Lamborghini, but assembly required. Whereas the Republican Party is like a 2004 Corolla, but it's already put together and it'll get you where it needs to get. And it's had all the basic repairs made. It makes some weird noises every now and then. It clearly needs an oil change, but it's still going. And Corollas last forever. So there's that way to look at it as is it a vehicle? What vehicle can you use to advance your ideas, to build your network, and to solve problems? I think it's important to point out, though, that one of the reasons why America had a strong kind of social fabric before there were political parties is because there was more of a culture of mutual aid, of community, of like the stuff that Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about in Democracy in America, that people knew each other and they did things together and they solved problems together. And that was actually something unique in world history, to his knowledge. And unfortunately, we don't have as much of that anymore. But that's something that I'm trying to bring back in some ways, that culture of community service, of voluntarism, of solving problems through voluntary action and voluntary association. So if there's a political party that can be partner to that, great. But if there's not one, or it's not strong in a particular area, we shouldn't be dependent on political parties or on government, for that matter, to solve problems. We need to learn how to solve problems ourselves in our communities, working together with people voluntarily, whether it's organizations, nonprofits, churches, bowling clubs, whatever it is, and not just say for everything that we disagree with or that we have a problem with, there should be a law for that.
So let me ask you this question. You bring up a good point about American history and community as being more connected in the past. An argument that I've heard and that I'm just asking to hear your opinion on is that in that cohesion there was more unification among races and different ethnic groups and those communities were built with not in an ethnically diverse environment.
I'm not sure how much that plays a factor. I don't think that that has played much of a factor. I mean, yeah, there is something to be said for whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. There is something to be said for, yes, like culturally homogenous places tend to have stronger social ties, and there are some objective reasons for that, like language, like just differing cultural norms, and it is not necessarily a matter of racism. Um,
Right, right.
but that being said, um, that
So
kind
that's
of
some of the
community.
that's an argument I've heard, is that the reason that those things were so successful was because there was more connection among similar ethnicities.
I don't think that's true. I don't think it's the reason. And honestly, it's possible that the people making that argument have maybe some kind of a vested interest in wanting to keep that separate. I don't know, but I really don't believe that. I think that that probably the number one reason why that mindset, that spirit of community has frayed and is seriously, like, to the extent it was already frayed, it was even more, it was disintegrated and undermined even more in the last 3 years, where basically like community and freedom of association was outlawed in
And
America.
freedom of religion. I mean,
Yeah,
our
at least
basic
in California.
God-given rights were just they were like,
Yeah,
nah.
if it was in the First Amendment, it wasn't allowed
Yeah, yeah.
because people were sick. You know, it's like that meme when they're writing the Constitution and someone looks up at Ben Franklin, I think, and they're like, "So this all goes out the window if people get sick, right?"
Yeah,
Or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, I think I haven't got. I started to get to it, and then I got off track. That I think the number one reason why it's not like that anymore is government. Like, I blame government for most things, and one of the things I will definitely blame government for is that it has replaced much of what used to be done voluntarily at a local level. That it's not hypothetical to say if government wasn't doing it that people would do it anyway. It's proven, it is fact, it has always been done. You know, before there was health insurance, there was mutual aid. Before there were employed fire departments, there were volunteer fire departments. I'm not saying that all that stuff was the ideal, and I'm not saying I'm against everything that we have now. To be honest, I'm glad that we have a pretty dependable like fire department. There are some things that pragmatically I'm glad that they're here. I'm just saying that as, as late as, but definitely not later than like the 20s and 30s, what was left of that original American culture of communitarianism and people knowing each other and doing stuff together and solving problems together, that kind of civic life was undermined, perhaps deliberately, but definitely undermined by this new spirit of government, the New Deal, which one of the things that was a New
Yeah,
Deal
the
about
creation of the
is,
Federal Reserve and everything that came after that, essentially,
yeah,
the Ron
and
Paul quote,
taxation
the
and
century of total war coincided with the century of central banking coincided with the century of total war.
absolutely, yeah,
And what does war do? It destroys communities.
it certainly does.
Yeah, that's I asked you that because it's just something I keep hearing, but my response back to that is that America has always had so many different groups of people and ethnicities and religions and uh, what, like, there's something there that has brought all these people together and built this system. It wasn't just English people who built the system, or like one group of people who built the system, kind of thing.
Right.
America was built by you're some English dude and a German dude over there, and you got the American Indian dude over there. You're all coming together, living in the same areas. Your cultures are gonna mix into each other. So it's very hard to say that the problems in America today and happen because there is so much diversity.
Yeah, there's no way to get away with saying that. It's based on a completely false notion. There was never a time in American history where there was this one homogenous culture, and
Right.
the closest we ever were to that, it was still not homogenous, and there were still a lot of other influences. So it's a false standard, it's a false narrative, it's a false goal, and what we need to be focused on. So I have a lot of issues with Ronald Reagan, but one of the things that I love and appreciate about him is his idea that America is an idea. America is more an idea than it is a place, and that's what unites people. It's not race, it's not language, it's a set of ideas and values. And that's one of the things that I thought that the Republican Party was supposed to be about. But I hear a lot more about like cultural homogeneity,
Yeah.
And traditional social values than I do about the actual defining values of what makes America America and what originally made Republicans Republican. And it's gotten pretty far away from that, it seems, at least in what people talk about and give their energy to.
Yes. Yeah. The way I look at it is it's a divide and conquer 101. I'm just trying to show people that, and by asking you these questions, I'm great answers as well too. Very good takes on that. Is that the diversity of America is the diversity of an empire. America is an empire. America was built as an empire from the very beginning. When the first governments from Europe started taking this land over, they built their empires here, whether it was the British or the Spanish or whatever, they were all building their empires here. So this place has always been structured as an empire. And one hallmark of, I'd say, more successful empires, say, the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, has been high levels of diversity.
Yeah.
And I would say that one of the successes of America is the fact that diversity can produce the greatest civilization we have. And, when we use the word diversity, it usually gets lumped up with the progressive view of diversity, but what I'm just saying is that, you can have a bunch of different groups who originally come from different countries. And when you put people together, and to your point, you brought up a really good point. This is a government issue. When you generally leave people to be free and do what they generally want, as long as they're not hurting people, then they're generally going to come together to find common goals, regardless of ethnicity or religion or any of these aspects.
They're going to work it out. They're going to make deals. They're going to make arrangements. They're going to sign contracts. They're going to shake hands. They're going to figure it out.
Spontaneous order happens. And when governments come in, that centralization ruins spontaneous order from peacefully coming together in the most efficient ways possible. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I really like that. Ultimately so many of the problems that we're seeing today in regards to race relations in America, it's government.
Yeah, and so you made me think of another point. You were talking about the value of diversity, and it reminded me about this stereotype of Republicans and the Republican Party, which to some extent is true, which is that it's dominated by old white guys.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's true. I'm often, when I go to meetings and events, and even when I teach at events, I'm often the youngest person by far. That is changing for the better. And
that was my experience too.
I'm also often the brownest person by far. And
that was my experience too.
I'm white. I'm white. I'm tan, but anyway, point is, there is diversity. There's not a lot of it, but the problem with that is not the literal representation of one color versus another, but there is something to be said for the fact that when everyone or the majority of people in an organization are of the same race, the same ethnic, the same cultural background, you just get a limited set of ideas. There's limited ideas, there's limited innovation, there's limited risk taking. So the race itself doesn't matter. But what matters is that, well, yeah, if you put together dozens of people in the same room that basically look like each other and were brought up the same ways, then there's only going to be so much. There's only going to be so much change and advancement and growth because they're all thinking the same way. When you bring in the value of diversity is not to balance out the colors. And I think it's really frivolous the way a lot of companies are, saying like your board doesn't have enough men or enough women or enough African Americans or whatever.
Yeah, like equity instead of equality kind of thing, right?
And I love, for example, Huffington Post a few years ago posted this picture and it said, "Notice anything about our board?" And it was it was all women sitting around a table. And they were trying to say like, look, we're counterbalancing. We have so many women on board. And someone commented, y'all only hire white people because they were all white. So like, it's just a false standard. But a good standard is let's prioritize the diversity of ideas. And a good proxy for diversity of ideas is diversity of people from different backgrounds. But it's the diversity of ideas that matters, not so much the diversity of race.
Wow, that's a very yeah, I like that. It seems like to get to this place, the individual would then have to realize that evolving humanity as a whole would take precedent over continuing the
status quo.
The status quo of their certain group. And you have to essentially break collectivism. And this is the point of freedom. Essentially, what we're really getting at is freedom. And when you have individual freedom, I remember when people would call Ron Paul racist, and he has that quote about how I don't see race because racism is a collectivist idea. And I see past that. I just look at people as individuals. So it would have to be in a environment where individuals saw themselves as individuals instead of tribal actors. And what I'm seeing happening in America right now is that there is an inclination to go back to certain specific this group separated structure. When like we were saying, this has never actually been the reality of American history, and groups have been intermingling in American history for all of American history, and before America was even before the United States was a government.
I think that some of the reasons why we're seeing that kind of regression back to this us versus them ism, and sometimes that comes out as race and like one versus another, or this idea that there needs to be more homogeneity. I don't know if I said that right. Is that's like the psychological default that we've always been taught in some way that there's always been some kind of us versus them. And we're not exactly, in America right now, we're not exactly the most open-minded or agile-minded culture right now. Or maybe we are the most, maybe we might be the most in the world, but definitely nowhere near where we could be. Okay, so what I mean by that is that when we have problems as a culture, as a country, as a civilization, whatever, unless people actually intentionally think different about it, they're going to default to some of their old ways. And it's always been very convenient to paint the bad guy as someone who looks different. So for example, to bring it back to Republicans for a moment, this idea that the problem with immigration, or a problem with immigration, is that it somehow like waters down the, I don't know, the consistency of American stock or something. Or the more polite version of that, the more political correct version of that is that, well, it's not about their race, it's about the ideas they bring from all over the world. And there is some truth to that. But it's really just, it's a kind of pointless, at best, it's a pointless conversation. And at worst, it reinforces this idea that if you're not a Democrat, that you're racist. So we really need to we need to discover something beyond, where am I going with this? We need to rediscover what actually makes America America and makes people want to come here. And it's not to, be lazy and live off the government. There are people who take huge risks to their lives included to come to America, and for mostly the same reasons that people have always taken big risks to come to America. And it's that American idea. So we need to get back to that, and we need to invalidate, not like deplatform because we're for free speech, but we need to invalidate and show the, let's just be blunt, the stupidity of the arguments of, immigration is a problem because it waters down what makes us American. And in fact, I think that Republicans need to learn to accept certain things that are outside of their control. There will be movement across borders. There will be movement of ideas, that people will vote with their feet. People will always seek better lives somewhere in the world, and America is usually going to be that better place in the world.
And so, I guess this is a good time to remind any Republican that the best ways to minimize mass immigration is don't go and imperialize the fucking world. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to have the blowback of, I mean, look, my family came here from Iran. Would my family have moved here if that country were a better place that wasn't fucked up by foreign actors? It's like, that's the reality of the situation. So, being a more anti-interventionist, small government conservative, the traditional old American right will minimize these blowback outcomes in the most efficient ways possible. When you're going around the world and being the policeman of the world, and you go and destroy somebody else's country, and then you're wondering why those same exact people are coming to your country for a better life, it's just, don't be surprised. So if your policy positions are resulting in mass influx of immigration into your country, and then you keep supporting those ideas that keep building onto that and adding onto that more and more, then don't be surprised when millions of people are like, yeah, man, America's probably a better place than where I live. I could just imagine if you're some other person outside of America, you're like, yeah, man, the life in America seems better than here, so I'm going to go there. But actually, let me ask you this, sure. Nathan. An argument that I've heard is that the people that are coming in are ones who have more communist-leaning ideas. As a result, the definition of what American is and the ideas, therefore, will become something that is foreign from the history of America. What would you say if you heard somebody say that to you?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that. I understand the concern, and I even share the concern. I wouldn't base my policy position on it, but I understand and I share the concern. What I do think is maybe that is more a reflection of the way our government is structured, that it's so susceptible to these collectivist and tyrannical ideas that we're afraid of. If more people come in who have those ideas, we're going to fall victim to those ideas, like within our lifetimes too. So that's one thing I'll point to, is that's maybe as much of a reflection or more of a reflection on the faults of American government and what we need to fix about it than it is of the people coming to America. But at the same time, to go back to something I said about people who come to America, the vast majority of people who do, they're not coming to restructure our society. They're coming for a better life and to work their asses off for their families. They might have values that are contrary to technically, supposedly founding American values, but that's not what they're here for.
Plenty of Americans have values that go against that too.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. And we don't necessarily know where those ideas came from, but yeah, there are lots of bad ideas that are already in America that we don't need foreigners in order to bring. Bad ideas is not a function of foreigners. Bad ideas are just bad ideas. They come from every direction. Now, to point to a more conservative response to that, which I also think is valid, I believe that there's some role for borders, and I understand the function that they play. I think a lot of the current function they play is superficial and unnecessary, and I don't like some of the jingoistic conclusions that it sometimes leads to. But pragmatically, it makes sense for them to be there. Now, that being said, the way immigration is happening right now, and the policy positions that Republicans are offering as solutions are really not addressing the issue. So on one extreme, on the conservative, I'm getting to my point here of what I'm saying my seemingly conservative view on it is. But I also want to paint the picture that there are two main extremes on immigration right now, right? It's the very extreme conservative, supposedly, notion that we need to very severely restrict who comes into the country and how many of them from where, etc. And I disagree with that. I think that I take the position that I think it might have been Ayn Rand that basically said there should be a big neon welcome sign that says "Welcome to America," and you got to fill out some paperwork. Maybe you get an interview, but it shouldn't take like 10 years to become a citizen. And then on the extreme left side, it's let everyone in with zero knowledge of them, zero accountability with regards to the government organizations that are helping them come here, that are supporting them. It's this big giant racket. And I do agree with the conservative argument against the Democrats and the left that there is a motivation on the left to bring more people to America so that they can gain more voters for themselves. Is that a reason to limit immigration? No, but I do think it's true. So this idea of a totally closed border, I think, is ridiculous. And the idea of a totally open border, I think, is ridiculous. What I want to see is for there to be a clear, understandable process that you don't need to spend years understanding and complying with. That if you are coming to America with the basic intention of what America is supposed to be about, to be more free and to liberate yourself and your family from the shackles of whatever government you came from, if you're coming here to lift yourself up and you are not a terrorist or, I guess, carrying Ebola, then welcome to America. And it should be a clear, simple, streamlined, easy, transparent process. So this is such a losing battle, such a losing approach for Republicans, because they keep making it about race. They really do. Maybe subtly so in some cases, but they keep making it about race, and they keep making it about that thing we were talking about earlier about this supposedly original American stock.
Well, it's not as subtle as it was before, is what I'm seeing happen more and more, which is not a good strategy for winning.
Right.
It just alienates people. And
Absolutely.
even me, in my time in the Republican Party, I mean, one of the reasons that I wasn't really down to continue in what I was doing in the Republican Party was because it's just constant divide in that exact regard. It's like it's an us versus them kind of thing, and you're like, dude, I'm trying to be part of us, and they essentially view you as you're somehow different, you know?
Yeah, and I don't think that that it comes from racism. I think sometimes it ends up sounding like racism because these are not most people in politics don't study philosophy or anything. They're not as
Yes.
philosophical as we are.
Yes.
So they're defaulting to things that they're saying a lot of things kind of like automatically by reflex. I don't think that it's actual racism that is motivating it for the most part. I think it's false concepts and a lot of logical fallacies, and it mostly is like economic and pragmatic arguments, which I think are false. But they're mostly making like economic arguments as to why immigration should.
They're not hate-based arguments,
Right?
And that's why, yeah, I totally agree. When we're talking about these ideas, it's not that we're saying that they're racist. We work with these people all the time. I don't think that most of them are actually racist.
Yeah.
Because if they were, would a real racist, work with other type of people and welcome them and smile and be friendly? It just doesn't really, it's if it's actual hate, the environment is probably going to be a little different.
Right.
So it's not that. It is other concerns, and they'll say things like, like our population is declining. It's like, yeah, that's a good point. So you got to do things that would make your population not decline. Then, okay, like I totally understand. If you want to do that, then you got to have strategies to do that. But you have to realize if you want to win in politics, you have to go outside of your one group, right?
You have to be aware of the way you have to be aware of how people are going to hear what you're saying. I mean, you can't like endlessly sugarcoat and cover and make it fun size and bite size every little thing that you say. You can't make it about are people going to love it or are they going to be offended? But at the same time, we do need to be aware of the consequences of our actions and our words. And if we're saying things without putting much thought into it, then it's going to have an impact, and it's generally going to have a detrimental impact on you politically.
All right, so we're going to read some chats right now. And before we continue, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, which is Specker, and that happens to be me. Specker is my company. I am the founder and CEO. Check out speckerhealth.com and take the new Specker Health Assessment, and also check out the new Specker Library, where you can read about scientific studies on ingredients, health, and lifestyle. And also, you can check out the Specker products. I'm about to take some Specker Energy right now.
Can I say something about Specker?
Please.
Okay, cool. I promise people watching that Amir did not put me up to this in any way. But the chapstick is the best I've ever used. It doesn't leave like a weird gunk on your lips and on your face. And the oil, so the CBD oil from Specker is the first hemp or cannabis, even adjacent product that I've ever gotten my grandparents to use. And, they have like arthritis and pain and all this stuff going on. And it helps. It helps them. I don't quite know how. I don't know how it all works. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist, but and I'm not the chemical scientist, whatever. But it's really great stuff, and I enjoy using it, and I've shared it with people who are skeptical, not of Specker itself, but of cannabis related products, or of something that isn't prescribed by a doctor, and it helps them. So, yay, Specker.
Hey, thank you so much for that, Nathan. I really appreciate those kind words. And just a little quick primer. The way that CBD works, and the reason that I am very adamant about using it as a primary ingredient in Specker products, and these are the new. I know, Nathan, you've used the classic CBD drops. These are the new targeted drops with Specker, and these are the energy drops, which is a low dose CBD and peppermint oil. The way that it works is a pretty basic science. The endocannabinoid system of the human body is the master regulatory system of nearly all human physiology. It controls your other systems of your body, like your nervous system and your digestive system, lymphatic system, all those systems, your neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, nearly all human physiology. CBD as a natural compound is arguably the best single natural compound to balance and regulate your endocannabinoid system. So if your endocannabinoid system is essentially the root of human health and disease, and you have a natural compound that can target the root instead of what most supplements and medicines do that target branches, then you're going to have extremely highly efficient outcomes. And that is why I am so adamant about continuing on with CBD as an ingredient in particular, because it is so powerful. And we're in a place in the industry right now where so many companies have shut their doors the last few years. And there was a massive influx, and now there's a massive outflux in the industry happening. But I recognize the amazing benefits that this single ingredient has. And that's why I continue to promote it, regardless of if it's trendy or not. So, speckerhealth.com, y'all. You can check it in the description. Also, if you're watching this right now, please like this video. Give me a follow. If you're right over here on Instagram, give Nathan a follow as well, and comment. Let me know what you want to hear about in the next streams. I'm here streaming multiple times a week on all topics related to health and politics. And today, me and Nathan are talking about a very important topic in regards to political strategy, why Republicans lose. Nathan, I want to shift a little after we read these comments. I want to shift a little into talking about locally focused activism, and then lockdowns, disobey LA, teaching people to shoot guns, working on campaigns, and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about that after we're done reading these comments. So I'm just going to go through a few of these. Let's see. We got Eddie says, however, that mindset became difficult with the consequences of the Spanish-American War and World War I. America became more involved in world affairs. Hard to go back. That's a question we have to ask ourselves as Americans right now is, do we want to continue America being the policeman and empire of the world? Because history already shows what happens when that continues. It's a systemic conclusion that there will be a retraction with an empire. So the empire can continue being overbloated, but that retraction historically is probably going to hit back harder than if you voluntarily start bringing it back yourself. Now we're seeing this crossroads where we're in this multipolar world, and it's I feel like it's hard for a lot of people to see what could or should happen next. However, I just implore people who think that we're living in these highly unique times. They are highly unique in specific ways, but as far as human behavior and government empire history
it's all
and the
happened
anatomy
before.
of an empire, it's just the same cycle.
There's really nothing new happening here.
Yeah.
And quick comment on what you just said in response to Eddie's comment. You know, whether you think of it as an empire or not, it is absolutely the case that any country, civilization, organization, even company, or even individual, when you stretch yourself thin, when you're trying to do everything at once and be everywhere at once and be everyone for appeal to and be involved with everything at once, you're going to stretch yourself thin. You're going to stretch your resources thin, and things internally are going to fall apart because you're widening yourself out externally, right? So the further you try to reach, you're going to have to start making some sacrifices about the stability of the foundation of whatever it is that's doing the far reaching. So yes, it absolutely happens to empires, but it also happens to companies. It also happens to
individuals,
and it happens to individuals, and that's a big reason why I'm really interested in mental health, which is a non-existent conversation almost in politics, and even less existent conversation in Republican and conservative and libertarian circles, is because people who work in politics don't know how to take care of themselves, and they go around saving the world, and they think, well, because I'm saving the world and doing such important thing, I can forego stuff, like sleep or civility or manners or responding to emails or whatever it is. And they just overlook things that are within their power because they're so focused on stuff that's outside of their power. They spread themselves too thin and they fall apart. The fate of empires is the fate of individuals.
Hey, that's why, Nathan, me, I'm all about health. And that's why I'm focusing my streams on health and politics, because they're so intertwined. And a lot of times in politics, you'll look at somebody who's having Ben Shapiro right now, for example. He's losing it. He's losing his mind on social media. And it's like, hey, man, you need to go do breath work, go exercise, go take some CBD, go get some sun, and then start expressing to the world how you really feel. Go try to find some balance before you externalize your internal imbalances in whatever it is, whether it's your personal relationships or whether it's politics. It really doesn't matter. The micro and the macro from your individual soul all the way up is going to have similar behaviors if you are not taking care of your health. And that's actually, if you're watching this right now, here's your reminder to go drink some water.
That's what's in this. That's what's in this mug, by the way. There's nothing.
Nice.
There's no reishi, matcha, fancy, mushroom-based latte that the influencers are drinking. This is just water.
All the influencers are drinking that. Your boy here at Specker decided we're not going into those trendy, expensive ingredients.
Is that salt in your hand?
I was just about to tell everybody.
I hope it's iodized.
This is no. This does not have synthetic iodine in it. Actually, fun fact: if you ever hear iodized salt, that means your salt has synthetic ingredients added into it. So that's what iodized salt means. They add synthetic iodine into your salt. What I was going to say is, if you're drinking your water, I mineralize my water with salt. This is Redmond's Real Salt. Nathan, I would recommend this to you as well. This is from a single salt mine in Utah. And I put a little bit in my water when I'm drinking it, and that salt will help mineralize my water and help boost my electrolytes naturally.
Good to know.
Natural electrolytes. So Redmond's Real Salt, unlike Himalayan salt, which is very hard to, find where it came from, transparency. This is American salt from a single salt mine in Utah. I like my transparency with the health ingredients I use. So, I would say don't waste your money on these all these synthetic electrolyte packets. A lot of these companies actually, in these electrolyte packets, they literally use Redmond's Real Salt as their ingredient. So little plug there for Redmond's Real Salt, which I do in every stream. So Redmond's Real Salt, sponsor me maybe. Let's not talk. Not sponsored, but I just love their
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so all right, let's go through these. Isaac says, great book, The Betrayal of the American Right by Murray Rothbard, expands on this issue. I have read thousands of pages of Murray Rothbard, and I don't know why I've never heard of that book.
I don't know either. I have not heard of that.
I'm very excited to read that. And another book I would recommend, the book that really got me learning about the history of this topic, Reclaiming the American Right by Justin Raimondo. Great book. Nathan, do you have anything? Well, let's see. Yeah, you haven't heard about that. All right, let's see.
I don't have anything to add there.
People come here because of what they see in the movies. Yeah, and where are those movies made usually? Los Angeles. To the point we were bringing up earlier.
It proves our point. It proves our point.
Man, so yeah, if you want to influence people across the world, might be a good idea to go make content in Los Angeles, right? Let's see. Shooting Shredder says, I changed my stance on immigration. Libertarians are wrong with their imaginary line, pun intended. Yeah, we actually talked about that earlier. We're not these like I mean, if you believe in private property rights, if you're a capitalist, you believe in right. What we're talking about here is state borders, government borders. And I feel like what a lot of libertarians today are doing are taking more of that Hoppian view, later Rothbard view of libertarian philosophy instead of the, let's just purely view this as an anarcho-capitalist, idealistic society, and then talk about policy positions using that anarcho-capitalist lens when we don't live in an anarcho-capitalist society. So the solutions in an anarcho-capitalist society being used in a highly centralized empire system are systemic flaws in a sense. Like one is highly decentralized, the other is highly centralized. Just from a pure system programming standpoint, it's very hard to find balance in those, right?
So something that a coworker pointed out a few years ago is that you can't have the supposedly purist libertarian open border in the context of a welfare state. You can't have. I like the notion of it. I like this idea of people being able to move freely all over the world, but it's in that particular way. It's not feasible in that particular way in the system that we have. And it would cause a lot of problems for a lot of people if we attempted that. So at the same time, objectively speaking, those lines are imaginary, but there's a reason why they're drawn where they're drawn, and there's some objective reasons. And there is a social and role for them in terms of maintaining stability. So are they arbitrarily drawn? And a lot of times, yes. Especially where, it's former European colonies. So yes, there's a lot of arbitrariness and subjectiveness about it. But at the same time, we have to think about the quality of life for the people within those borders right now. And we got to some extent, work with what we got. So like I said, I don't believe in closed borders, and I don't believe in totally porous non-borders. I believe in
I agree.
Accountability and structure and streamlined.
Yeah. I feel like even if you do have one of those extremist views, just pragmatically, you need to realize that it's probably not going to be a long-term solution. And that's again, Democrat Party strategy. That's something that they do very well. Is they just say like, all right, man, like Bernie's like, all right, man, I'm a communist, but I'll go work with those moderate Democrats who very well could be in the Republican neocons, right? Like
they embrace incrementalism, which the Democrats are much better at embracing incrementalism than Republicans tend to be. I believe in relentless incrementalism.
Ron Paul would talk about incrementalism. Actually, the first time I ever heard the term incrementalism was through Ron Paul. All right, so we got so hey, what's up, Mama MacGyver? Mama MacGyver says everyone needs Specker right now. Saved my family's life from mold illness twice. Thank you so much. That is
Amir. We should just take all the political people we know into the woods and just like dose them with things. But just CBD, clearly, of course, just CBD. But
I'll take it a next step further. We're going to add some THC and potentially some psilocybin into there as well. And that's CBD.
I can't publicly advocate for that, but
let me publicly advocate for that, my friend.
You do you. But I think she's right. I think we all need CBD.
Yeah. I think the future of America, if we're going to have efficient outcomes, and by efficient outcomes, I mean the highest levels of peace and freedom with the lowest levels of, violence and corruption, right? If we're going to get to there, we should really just focus on our health first. It's a lot harder to hate other people when you are healthy and love your own self and are comfortable in your own skin and proud of your own health gains.
Yeah.
And what you put out to the world is therefore going to be much more positive. And when you sit down with people that you disagree with, you can figure out solutions more efficiently without your personal problems, your imbalanced mental health or your imbalanced physical health that usually results in imbalanced mental health. So that was my big thing when I was active in the Republican Party, was constantly trying to teach people about diet and exercise and being healthier and just practices that they can use. And it is successful. A lot of people are desiring to be healthier and happier.
Right.
And especially when you're working in politics, there's so much negativity and hate and spiritual imbalance. That's really like when I have to take this to the root, it's really spiritually imbalanced. And a lot of spiritual imbalance comes from being physically unhealthy. So I see people, if you wake up and instead of going outside, drinking some water and getting some natural light, if you wake up and then you pull your phone here in your bed, look at your phone and then wake up like this, and then the first thing you do is go make a cup of coffee and start drinking the coffee before you've had any natural light, any water, taken any real deep breaths yet, and then you're doing that, and then
where do you have a camera in my house?
What?
Where do you have a camera in my house?
Yeah. Well, Nathan, there you go. God is speaking to you clearly.
No,
right
but
now. The point is that if you just focus on your health before you're focusing on anything external,
agreed.
You're going to have better outcomes. In politics, that's where people do it the least. In a corporate setting, you can't be a piece of shit like too outwardly, right? In politics, that gets promoted. If you're a piece of shit outwardly,
it's like this. The gold standard, like campaign operative is someone who is eating fast food and Hot Pockets for every meal of the day, and they don't have personal time, and they don't take any time off, and they work like 70 to 80 hours a week, and there's this weird like aura that we're supposed to see around it, like. Campaign and political people are supposed to see that as that's what it looks like to be committed and dedicated, and that's the real grind, and it's this over worship of supposedly this hustle culture, but it takes like what I think of as an East Coaster as hustle, like working hard and you give your work your all. It takes that even further. It's like beat yourself into a pulp culture, okay? And it's gross, and it's not good for you, and it's not good for politics. The Leadership Institute has this saying: you can't save the world if you can't pay the bills. Well, I'm going to take that further and say you can't save the world if you can't take care of yourself. You can't take care of others if you can't take care of yourself. You can't liberate others if you can't liberate yourself. And part of liberating yourself is being aware of what you're putting on or in your body, and being free from doing those things automatically because everyone else is doing it, or because someone in a uniform or a smock is telling you to, and just embracing it all uncritically. That's you are not an effective advocate of freedom if you are not intentional about your health.
Yeah, and just philosophically speaking, and from a political lens as well, your body is technically the only thing you tangibly can own in this physical reality, right? Like every other tangible thing can be taken away, and what you still have at the end of the day is your body, right? So that really should be the main focus. And to the point I was bringing up, what's funny is that in the corporate world, in the business world, entrepreneurs have clearly realized that health is wealth, right? And so many entrepreneurs these days realize that, you know, if I work 18 hours a day, I don't exercise, I eat like shit, my efficiency is going to not be as high as it could be. And the corporate world is generally starting to realize this. The political world should recognize this reality as well. It's hard too, though, when you're in the political world and having these political discussions. It's like this darkness that pulls you in, and it's really hard. You have to have a lot of discipline to, you know, get out of doom scrolling, for example, and catch yourself when you start doom scrolling. This is what I'll do. If I catch myself doom scrolling, I'll literally just put my phone away and I'll just walk outside. And
politics is not a substitute for self-discipline and for health. You can't indefinitely do it without caring about your health.
It'll suck your soul out of you. That's really what politics does. It's a soul-sucking industry to be in. And if you don't fight to find that balance as hard as you can, then that darkness is going to suck you in. And it's just a pit of darkness, essentially.
It's a big reason I left DC.
Yeah. And so we got Nick here. He says, good to see Nathan Fatal.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
I remember you.
It's actually
nice
something as Nick says, government is pretty much never value free / neutral. Traditional values isn't even paid lip service to anymore. Jesus Christ is king. Put families first to make America great again. Nathan, what do you have to say about that?
Ooh. I mean, I don't consider myself Christian, but there's definitely an important place for God, or for whatever you call God. You know, for me, it's something beyond and above us that it would be hubristic of us to say that we totally understand or have personal conversations with, or that you know, I don't want to get too much into religion, but I do agree with you, Amir, that there's a kind of spiritual decay in that when you don't take care of your body, you're not taking care of your soul, and vice versa. And if you're not taking care of either or both of those, it's going to make you weak physically and morally and intellectually. So I do believe in you know, a higher power and a higher consciousness. And there are a lot of other ways that I frame it sometimes. And I do think that comes first, or should come first, in the sense that if you are not in touch with, you know, why your values are your values, if you're not in touch with how you have arrived at your values, if you're not in touch with where does your moral system come from, and what your sense of purpose comes from, and what your meaning, what meaning you're living in service of, and what you want to give to the world and get from the world, then you're definitely spiritually astray. And that is a problem, whether you're Christian or not, whether you're Republican or not. And you don't need to be Christian or Republican in order to be impacted by those things. It impacts all of us. So something we should all be intentional about.
Yeah. And, you know, common ground comes a lot easier when you can focus on health as a primary leader instead of divisive politics. And the beautiful thing is that, you know, if you're a specific exercise style, specific diet style, you know, specific breathwork styles, you could find communities and find common ground across the differentiating factors. And as a athlete who's part of a community that has just so many different colors and races and religions and whatever, just people coming together for the common goal of, doing 360s on a metal bar. It's incredible to see the breakdown of negativity when health is the leader and making everybody healthier is the leader, and making yourself healthier and knowing that you all have that mutual common ground. Like, hey, if you think that you're so different from these other people, go see how many cultures love red meat. Like, you got to find the common ground here. You like pull-ups? Hey man, you think those Russians are your enemy? You should see how they do pull-ups, and you might be able to learn and evolve.
And how they tame bears.
That's something that maybe we could learn as Americans. We look at our Russian friends over there and we're like, all right, you got to wrestle bears over there. Maybe some Americans can step it up and start wrestling some bears over here as well, So yeah, the whole, make America great again. I think, the thing I'm thinking more now, the slogan I'm thinking more now is make America greater, because America from its inception and even before was and is the greatest place on earth today.
Absolutely. It's always been great. It's never stopped being great, but it's definitely not the greatest it could be.
Yes. And the beautiful thing.
And there are a lot of things we've fallen short on.
And the beautiful thing about the American system is what it has proven as a system is that the system is open to regularly evolving. And that's actually not common in many other government systems and governments throughout history. Is shifting policy on specific positions may never even happen on certain issues with specific governments. And I would argue that is what keeps America surviving and thriving, even through some of the most difficult moments in American history. So,
by the way, Nathan, just to punctuate real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have an absolute hard cutoff at 5:30, and my phone battery, my computer is plugged in. I can keep live streaming, but my phone battery is going to die significantly before that.
All right, check it out. This is what we're going to do. If you're on Instagram right now, hop over to Rumble, YouTube, or Twitter. We're hopping off Instagram, and we're.
Do you have a link that you can post in the Instagram chat so people? I don't know how it works, so that people can click on it.
Yeah, I already. Yeah. Let's see. Let me cut that out. Peace and love. All right. I already was putting it in the whole time. So people could just use that and go over. But we're done. We're done there now. So I wanted to talk to you about the lockdowns and disobey LA. So we'll kind of transition into our finish on this so we can get that hard finish in.
For sure. Yeah. What do you want to know? I got a lot to say. I'm just plugging in my phone.
Yeah. So, the lockdowns in Los Angeles, I was there in the beginning, and I was not happy about them at all. But I remember I was disobeying the second that they declared that lockdowns are in Los Angeles and the parks are closed down. I remember, man, I was like, I'm going to the park. And I went to the park that I do calisthenics at, and they had all the fences around and tape and caution tape. And I just tore it all down and did my workout. I actually remember there was because they kept putting it back up, and then I'll go back and take it back down. There was a cop there, and I was doing it, and I was like, all right, man, I'm disobeying the government specifically, and this cop right there can choose if he wants to oppress me for this fucking bullshit, or if he's not going to do anything, and that cop is going to disobey. And one of the things that made me have a lot of faith, in California, you saw this, and I don't think there's enough spotlight put on this fact that when the lockdowns happened in California, every sheriff was against it. every county in California, as far as the sheriffs, they were rejecting it. Yeah. One sheriff after another was coming out saying, we're not enforcing this. We don't agree with this. Go live your life. Do what you got to do.
Oh, absolutely. And just to back that up real quick, I actually had one of the many things we did as part of Disobey LA was contact the sheriff's departments of other counties. And I had someone contact all the sheriff's departments, and at least 52 of the 58 sheriffs, so there's a sheriff per county, 58 counties, at least 52 of the sheriff's departments explicitly said over the phone, no, we're not enforcing that. We're not enforcing the mask mandates. We're not enforcing the vaccine mandates. We're not enforcing the curfews. So it's not just a feel-good notion. They actually said it verbally.
And they went on their social medias and had viral videos where they're essentially stepping up to the state of California and saying, we're not doing that. So my thought was this: as soon as the lockdowns happened, I'm sure a lot of people thought this as well. Like, all right, man, American police are really going to show who they really are now. Are they really the tyrants that we think they're going to be? Because if trajectory shows on enforcing bullshit laws, these cops are going to choose if they're going to be redcoats or not with these lockdown orders. Because it's one thing to, like even the war on drugs, right? Like, yeah, we think the war on drugs is absolutely absurd, but in a cop's mind, like thinking like, oh, I'm getting heroin off the streets or meth off the streets or something, like but like you have to wear a mask. You can't go outside. Like that's just that, like that's something that it got to show all of us as an example that American values actually still do exist and still dominate. Because if they didn't, we'd literally have looked like the rest of the world. Sure, they locked things down, but were they going after guys like me who were just out at the parks and mass arresting
surfers?
Yeah, like that's actually, they did that. Remember, like they went and the surfer guys and stuff. So there are cases where some cops did enforce, but the huge majority did not. And the times that they did enforce, look what happened. They went viral and they're cultural icons to this day, of the beach guy that was meditating, or the guy that was in the water that they went and got, right? Yeah. I believe these were both in Los Angeles, right?
I believe
Los
so.
Angeles. Yeah.
The surfer, definitely, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it shows that even in a place like Los Angeles County, while there was some enforcement, and actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan, but I believe eventually the sheriff in LA also started saying, like, we're not, like, they, who was it? Villanueva?
Sheriff Villanueva at the time. Yeah, he's no longer the sheriff, unfortunately.
Yes, he's not, yeah.
But he was loudly and unabashedly against the lockdowns.
And we can maybe conclude that one of the reasons he lost was because he stepped out of line so hard during the lockdowns.
Well, the county board of supervisors turned against him and basically sought to have legal and financial repercussions for sheriffs not unequivocally, unquestioningly enforcing all of their mandates. So they really villainized him for being selective about what to enforce. And what was he focusing on instead? Oh, actual crime, like looting and shoplifting and stabbing and shooting people. He was focused on actual crimes with actual people committing actual violence against other people, and saying, even if I wanted to enforce the lockdowns, mandates, and everything that came with the whole COVID regime, it wouldn't make pragmatic sense to do so, because there are way bigger issues than people sitting around a table eating hummus together. The sense of priorities of our county government were just totally out of line and unreflective of reality. And the sheriffs and police chiefs, so each city has a police chief, were mostly.
Did LAPD police chief come out as well?
I don't recall if specifically LA City Police Chief did, but the majority of the police chiefs of the 88 cities of LA County were also not enforcing. They had better things to do.
Yeah, remember too, these were during the anti-lockdown protests and BLM stuff. So yeah, they really did have better shit to do. However, you know, in the beginning, they were going to restaurants. You know, I remember posting pictures of sheriffs going to restaurants in LA and shutting them down and saying can't be open. And but
yeah, it wasn't the sheriffs though that did that. It wasn't the sheriffs though that did that. It was our county supervisors. It was these people that they have the power of basically judge, jury, executioner. They're basically the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch all in one.
So you're saying the supervisors were the ones who told the sheriffs essentially to go there. The sheriff's office wasn't like looking for businesses. They would get a call,
right?
And then they would have
the real culprits and the real tyrants were the board of supervisors, which is an elected position. Yes. There are 5 of them for LA County. There are 5 of them for every county in California. The city councils and the mayors and the city and county health departments.
And to clarify, these are all nonpartisan positions, right?
Health department and city council, definitely. I think board of supervisors is technically nonpartisan in that
but they're all Democrats, right?
Right. You don't run as a member of a party or representative of or nominee of a party. There is someone on there, I forget her name, who's supposedly more conservative. But yeah, the board of supervisors were our enemies. They're on this one.
They were the ultimate tyrants during that time, as far as the local levels went.
So I want to be very clear about the lockdowns and the other massive power grabs that local and state and federal government took during COVID. One is that what they did was illegal, immoral, unethical, and wrong. And I'd go as far as to say evil. And I assert, and I can back it up with argument, but I assert that in terms of the proportionality, or in terms of how much they infringed on our rights and how far they went, it was the biggest assault on our rights since, if not more than, since the Patriot Act. Okay, and quite possibly in our entire lifetimes.
I literally, you know, Nathan, it's funny. I just posted a video of myself saying that the COVID lockdowns were to the left as 9/11 was and it's hard to figure out which era was more tyrannical, right?
Well, because they both were.
Yeah.
And I have a specific comment on that, but I'm sorry. I'll let you finish what you were saying.
No, that's all. It's just like the left and right duality is that while the left was, you know, being lockdown tyrants, and the right, so many people on the right that we're now seeing this week are not so into freedom. These are a lot of the same people that after 9/11 were censoring everybody, the Patriot Act, the post-Patriot Act era. So it's you know, this weird duality where, you know, just because it's not as much a party thing as much as it is, you know, a philosophical idea about control and centralization, really, you know.
Well, when you say it's not as much a party thing, I think what you're saying is it's not limited to one party, right?
Yes, not limited to one party. Exactly, yeah.
And, you know, case in point, how was the left, and I say the left because it was more than just the Democratic Party. It was all of the institutions and organizations, and the entire machine of the left was behind this idea of you must be forced to put certain things on or in your bodies and to confine the movement of your bodies to certain places at certain times for certain reasons with certain numbers of people. Okay. And what you did with whom, when, where, and how was all regulated and limited. Why were they able to do that? Well, because they copied from the playbook of the right post 9/11.
Yes. Okay, and a lot of the laws they used were the ones that were written after 9/11 to be able to end that tyranny.
And granted, I think that they took this a lot further and it pervaded much more into everyday life. But look at the commonalities, you know, both with 9/11 and terrorism and with COVID, we were made to believe that we are at an imminent and consistent risk of attack from any direction by this undefined, borderless, invisible enemy. Okay. And that it's a mysterious enemy that is powerful and it's gaining power. And in order to fight it and to gain security over it, you need to limit and give up some of your freedom. Freedom of what? In both cases, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion.
The most basic freedoms that we have.
Yes, all of those things were assaulted and systematically assaulted and undermined immediately after and since 9/11, and immediately during and since the COVID regime era. And it was also done around 2008 with the financial crisis, supposedly, but not to the same extent. But my point is, at the very least, it's just as bad as what happened after 9/11 in terms of the infringement on the Constitution, on our natural and inherent rights, which are enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't give it to us. It protects them. Supposedly, it was supposed to. Not that any politicians care about it anymore. But it was at least as bad as that, and possibly worse, because it really pervaded into our everyday lives, and media and social media and like national text updates and everything. We have a much more developed system of indoctrination and communication and everything in between now than we did in the early years of the 2000s.
Yeah, so those systems were just being built. So what you're saying is that if they had the systems back then, it might have even been worse than how they treated us during the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, absolutely. But I stand by what I'm saying, that the interventionist neocon right and the people who supported war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and eternal war ever since, and eternal intervention, and eternally treating Americans like potential criminals, they set the foundation for everything that happened 2020 through now. And every single thing that they did was repeated and brought to a further extent. And it was very clear to me very early on that, oh, wow, this is bad and it's going to get worse. And they're going to use this again as a justification to dramatically expand their power, the same way they did after 9/11 in the name of fighting terrorism, the same way they did after the financial meltdown in the name of fighting inequality, and the same way that they did, well, I can't say it's the same way because now we're talking about the same thing. And the same way that they're starting to do again now, they're bringing back the whole terrorism thing and talking about terror cells in America.
Literally, this last week feels like October 2001.
It really, really does. Yeah. And what has laid the groundwork for anything that gets done in the future to take advantage of a crisis, assuming it is a totally natural crisis that wasn't engineered or planned in any way. Even so, they take advantage of them when they happen. Well, COVID was the COVID era was a great time for them to experiment, but it was also a great time for people who actually believe in liberty as a principle to actually come to terms with what they actually believe in and fight for it. And it showed people's true colors. And
let's segue that into it just really explained Disobey LA, the focus on, say, shooting, and how, to your point, it really showed if you're about freedom, you're going to now express that freedom in action. Right. And that era showed who's really about it and who's really not. And I'm very proud of myself for proving to myself how about it I am.
Yeah.
So can you explain honestly, to me, just the disobey LA structure and kind of what came out of that?
Absolutely. But I'll also say I don't usually say this, but I'm proud of myself too, that I stood my ground on things that were uncomfortable to stand my ground on. And I'm proud of a lot of people who have done the same. And I'm ashamed of people who at best, just kind of didn't stand up for anything and kind of went with the flow. But I'm especially ashamed of people who, proudly went with the flow and just insulted anyone who thought differently. So
they
disobey
put
LA
politics over people instead of people over politics.
They did. So disobey LA is what it sounds like. It's not really active now, but there's certainly the infrastructure and the data and the people to be able to be active when needed. But the main theme, as the name implies, is disobedience, civil disobedience. And what is civil disobedience? Well, it's peaceful, it's nonviolent, it's focused on our civil rights, on fighting for it is fighting against something specifically, but more importantly, it's fighting for something specifically. And that for what was for primarily the First Amendment, for freedom of assembly, freedom of association. They don't say that in the Constitution, association, but same concept. Freedom of
assembly
religion
and association are kind of synonymous, right?
Who you associate with, whether it's a literal assembly or it's having 3 or more people at your house for Thanksgiving, which that was under attack too. They told us they recommended wear your mask between every bite at Thanksgiving. Don't use fireworks on Independence Day. Don't sing on Christmas.
And do you remember actually, when that first July 4th, when they said in LA, don't go out, and it was like the biggest fireworks show. Like
it was glorious.
Do you remember that? Yeah,
I remember.
That was like the resistance showed that, like, hey, we're not down for this shit. That's what made me really like. I had really never been as proud to be an American as those few years, because while tyranny was at the highest levels possible, Americans proved that when push comes to shove on freedom, every other country in the world falls in line and listens to their masters. When when the politicians here say, stay in your house, don't celebrate 4th of July, even more people go outside to do what they say don't do. So.
Right. Well, that was part of what motivated me to start Disobey LA, is we cannot let this happen here. We can't let them get away with this. We can't let this become the norm. We have to set the tone here, we lost LA.
Everywhere on freedom, right?
Yeah, we need to set the tone in LA, because if they can get away with it here, they're going to try to get away with it anywhere else in America. And if they can get away with it in America, then they can get away with it in any other country. Okay, what America allows, other countries will certainly allow in terms of government power. So Disobey LA from the beginning was and has been about civil disobedience against unjust, illegal, immoral, unconstitutional, they're not even laws, but unjust rules, regulations, and abuse of power. And mostly what that looked like was explicitly, loudly, unabashedly disobeying the curfews, the lockdowns, and the mandates. Yep. So not complying with any of it and teaching other people how to not comply and how to be non-compliant and effectively non-compliant, and to do it all civilly and non-violently. So one specific way that looked, so restaurants, I forget the exact time frame, but for a long amount of time, for most of 2021, and I think the end of 2020, and for a lot of at least like the first half of 2022, there were a lot of restrictions on restaurants. And for a time, it was, the restaurant, they were never fully closed, but for a long time, indoor dining or in-person dining was not allowed. And then at one point, it was a little less restrictive. It was, you can eat with other people, but you have to eat in an indoor. You need to eat.
Well, if you remember, there was constant, they would make a declaration and then a bunch of people would push back and then they would change their mind. And then it was just this back and forth.
It was constantly changing.
Now you can do outdoor, now you can't. Now you can do indoor, now you can't. And it was just
that is one problem. That is one problem with it. And that's a problem that has always existed with over-regulation of anything, is that it's hard to keep track of. It's hard to comply with. Even if you wanted to comply, it's hard to comply. But then there's a question of, why should I have to comply with this in the first place? It's wrong. So one of the things that we did was we would go out of our way. We would look for restaurants, whether through word of mouth or through systematic campaign-like phone banking. And we would identify restaurants that were non-compliant, and we would organize in-person, secret in-person invite-only events where we would break every rule from the county supervisors and the county board of health that we could. And we would write them a review, but the review would be just about the food. We would never say, like, we had a great time with our friends, because that would call them out. Okay, so the system for supporting restaurants was find the non-compliant, make a reservation and organize a private, in-person, not publicly known event. Pay in cash and tip them 20% or more in cash, and write them overwhelmingly generous reviews on Google Maps and Yelp, only mentioning the quality of the food. It was those main tiers. And part of supporting that was we made a database of 7,000 restaurants in LA County, and actually got volunteers together and called them. And we had a very well-written script so that it was clear that we were not trying to out them, and we were trying to help them. And if they said, hey, we're complying, okay, have a nice day. We're not going to waste time on you. If they say, oh yeah, we're complying, we're going all the way, okay, thank you, have a nice day. And then maybe we would write them a negative review, because they're advancing an illegal and immoral policy. But if they were saying, hey man, we're really struggling, like we need to keep doing in-person dining just in order to survive, they didn't have to have a political motivation for it. If they were in even partial non-compliance for any reason, they would have full-hearted support, including financial, legal, political, and physical presence, like getting in the way if health department tried to go there and tried to shut them down or audit them.
Which you were actually part of one of those places in Burbank, I believe. Was that?
Yeah, Tin Horn Flats.
Where they were going hard. The government was like, and the people just would be out there. You were involved in that, right?
Very much so. Yeah. Very, very sad what happened there. Long established, awesome restaurant, one of the oldest bars in Burbank, run by a family of Armenian immigrants and first, second generation Americans. Really cool people, great food, great service. And they actually were partially complying. They were doing their best to follow the rules in a way that they'd still be able to stay afloat. But they had to break some of the rules also to stay afloat and to keep the business alive. And they would always get pushback on the little things that they weren't in compliance with. And then they finally realized, well, this isn't really about health, and this isn't really about keeping people safe, even though they were trying to be healthy and safe. This is about control and compliance and domination. So yeah, they started to resist, and I and the many good people in Disobey LA, and I'm very careful about not disclosing anyone's like identities or specific organizations, but we very loudly and steadfastly supported them and helped them stay afloat and keep making money and keep putting food on the table, literally at their restaurant, but also for their family, to keep their source of income existing for as long as we could, before the Burbank City Council went full Gestapo and ordered the militarization of the police department, which the police department was on our side for a while. But the Gestapo City Council decided to militarize that police department, threaten their jobs, threaten their funding, and say, you need to dress up in your riot gear and go shut that restaurant down. Put sandbags and plywood and a fence around it, and keep people out and arrest anyone who questions you. That's what they did. So I meant, I used the term earlier that people show their true colors. There are two main true colors that got shown during COVID. It was either, the people who ultimately believe that government is primary, and that people are servants of government, and we're born to, serve the collective, and we're slaves of the state. And those people, they took that all the way. and they showed what they really believe in, which is use physical force to get people to comply with your beliefs. And on the other side, people who
regardless
actually
of if those beliefs are right or wrong, it's just
exactly.
about compliance.
Exactly. And on the other side, people who actually believe on principle in freedom of speech, of association, and everything else we talked about, that is a principle that's inviolable. You cannot violate that, even in the name of health or security or safety. That's invalid, and we're not going to stand for it. And I'm really proud of the people who stood up, and it was a lot of people who eventually stood up. We were not prepared for this onslaught at the beginning, but a lot of people learned quickly. And by the height of the regime and everything it was doing, and by regime I'm referring mostly to Gavin Newsom and to the county and our county government in LA County, but also of course Joe Biden and Fauci and everyone like them. We resisted the regime at every turn and made their lives and their jobs difficult, and in some cases got them out of a job because their careers need to be ended.
Yeah, that's California seemed like it was a lost cause to a lot of people on the outside, but the resistance here for the people on the inside was very clear and very strong.
Yeah.
And to your point, it came at us so hard and fast with the tyranny, and it kept going when they kept telling us it would end. So we never knew where we should go. So that's from a control standpoint, it's a great way to control people, to constantly keep them questioning, wondering what's going to happen next. I feel like a year into it, a lot of us realize, like, all right, man, we got to this is clearly, we've learned what's going to happen now. It's not really 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This is the system that they're going to try to implement if we do not resist it with everything we have. And I am very proud of us as Americans that we did resist it. And that resistance, to the point you brought up earlier, influenced the rest of the world, because once America's lockdowns were showing that they were not really going to manifest to look like China, then you started seeing the mass resistance that was trying to be had in places like Canada, Australia, because they saw our resistance. They saw all the people who took the mass sales of guns and ammo in the United States at that time. And essentially, as Americans, we had the ability, thank God, to influence others outside of America to recognize their freedoms. And it just showed me that all of this fear that we have, or that all of this fear that people are having right now about American system and the culture and the ideas changing and becoming something else, like I said, we proved that our culture of freedom is still shining bright in the United States.
Agreed.
So just to finish off, Nathan, because I know you got to go, give me your final thoughts about the conversation that we just had today. You brought up some really awesome things today, great things to think about.
Well, thank you. And a final thought on Disobey LA. First of all, that I really firmly believe, this is a bold statement, but I believe that the protests and the effectiveness and increasing scale of the protests that happened in LA emboldened the rest of America, and that emboldened the protests in Canada, and that emboldened the protests in France and the rest of Europe, and that emboldened the protests even in China. So I'm not saying it was cause and effect, that what we did caused those things, but I am saying that we said to our government at every level and to people who seek to control and dominate and violate others at every level, no, do not comply. So that's my message to people, is stand for something and fight for something. And it does not that does not mean that you have to put your life at risk. I mean, I do believe people should have something worth dying for, but I'm just saying stand for something, and you have to draw the line somewhere of what is permissible with the use of power. And we need to stand by that and say that there are certain things that are unacceptable, no matter what the justification is, right? And we need to be willing to risk reputation and comfort and stability, and yes, perhaps even safety, to fight for those things. Because if we don't, then it's going to become even more unsafe and unstable and unlivable and not worth living for you and for everybody. So we cannot make exceptions on something as basic and fundamental as the First Amendment protected right to assemble, associate, worship or not worship, pray or not pray, question media, put out opposing narratives, say things in writing and verbally, all those things that fall under the First Amendment. We can't let that be infringed in any way. And that was used to infringe on the Second Amendment too. Like when they closed gun stores, that's infringing on the First and Second Amendment. And they also did a lot to infringe on the Fourth Amendment. But when you don't protect the First Amendment, then you're undermining all the rest of them. And when you're undermining the Second Amendment and the right to, it's not about guns, it's about defending yourself and bodily
each
integrity.
Individual having the right to defend themselves and their own body.
And when you're not defending that, then you're basically saying that all that other stuff that we say is a right, the only thing backing it up is a piece of paper. Kind of like our money. And how much is our money worth now? So there are a lot of parallels here. We need to learn from history, and we don't have to look that far back. We have very recent history to learn from. But whenever you see people trying to expand their power over others, the answer is do not comply.
Yeah, and to take that to the next step, even if it aligns with your beliefs, if you see control trying to be added to people who want to be free, then you might want to think twice about
force and violence are wrong.
Yeah, you can have those ideas, but if you force those ideas, then it's going to be a different conversation, right?
If you need force and violence to advance your ideas, then you need to reevaluate your ideas and what makes you willing to initiate force or have someone in a uniform do it for you.
Love it. Love it. Nathan, where can people find you and connect with you?
Really, the only place that I'm consistently active is on Instagram. I'll post it in the chat here, at N as in Nathan .Inacio.f.
And I'll post that in the description as well, so
awesome.
You can check out.
Shortly, Nathan. I'm going to be launching an Instagram page for Leadership Institute community organizing, but if you follow my personal, you'll hear about it. So that's the one best place for right now.
Awesome. Perfect. Nathan, thank you so much. If you're watching this right now, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please do me a huge favor. Like this video, comment, let me know what you want to see next. Let me know what you like about this video. Share this video with your friends. And I am on the journey of getting to 1 million followers. So your help is greatly appreciated this time. And as always, please make sure to check out speckerhealth.com and support my business. I love you all, and I will see you soon. And make sure to go outside, be healthy, happy, go drink some water, maximize natural light, minimize artificial light. And if you want to go learn more about all the other health things that I'm talking about, go watch my other videos. I love you all. I'll see you soon. Bye.